everyone, and welcome to the Growth Almanac podcast. I'm Ruby, very passionate about growth both in my personal and professional life. And growth to me is all about small steps, big ideas.
Hey everyone, I'm Shrestha, a curious mind, and I'm very excited to bring you to our thought provoking conversations.
All right, so what are we going to talk about today, Shrestha?
I thought we could talk about diversity at workplace. What are your thoughts about that, Ruby?
It's interesting you brought that up. Having a mix of experiences, mix of background is very important for us to be able to have a balanced and a growth culture and mindset in the workplace.
I agree. I think for a long time I was a very strong believer of equal opportunities, right? I was like, why should somebody get a better treatment, more opportunities? But over time, I realized it's more about equitable opportunities versus equal opportunities because there are so many people who need that support, that resource for them to make use of all these opportunity that are presented to them, right? I remember even seeing a visual once where there were three guys standing trying to look over the fence, and when you talk about equal opportunities, it's like all of them are given the same block of wood to stand on it to look over the fence, versus when it is equitable opportunities, you look at who's short, who's tall, and based on that you give different piece of block, so they are all able to see the same way outside of the fence, right? And that made so much sense because I think it also comes from privilege, where we sometimes don't understand the hardships that a group of people go through. There's so much underrepresentation. So yeah, I think that's my stance right now.
I wasn't really a big believer in, hey, we need to go out of our way in terms of inclusion until I think a few years ago. Like, I wouldn't even say it's more than 3 to 5 years ago. I always believed, hey, if you belong, you belong. If you have merit, you will make it and you will prove yourself. And then I had this conversation with a friend, and she had very similar ideas, right? Like the way you were talking. If you don't go out of your way to give opportunity to people, yes, it is about merit. Give opportunity and then choose the right people to be able to actually come to the table.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't even say this was a diversity conversation, but I remember, like, as I started going out for more and more corporate outings, most of the time I would be the only woman in the group, right? Everyone treated me very well, equal, etc., etc. But then in the evening after work, we would go out for dinner
Mhm.
and we would be standing, let's say, at the bar.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
All tall guys, everybody with a beer mug. I am the only one who's short. I am the only one who doesn't have a beer mug, so I don't take alcohol. So I don't have any of that. I have water or truly. And I'm like staring like this. And they're talking football. And then I have to sort of change the conversation and reel it back to something that is common to all of us. Was it a challenge? Were they doing it on purpose? No, but then you look around and you realize there's only one of you. Feeling like you belong there, you really have to make an extra effort. Yeah. And think about it for us when you talk about for those of us who have had opportunities and who have been there, if it's hard for us, then for those people who actually come from these underprivileged environments, it's even harder. They don't even know what to do or what to expect.
Yep.
So,
I totally understand. Also, Ruby, you said that you just changed your beliefs a few years ago, right? But when you started working, did you feel at that point, because, I think over the past probably 20 years or so is when the gap or the diversity has gotten a little better in terms of women and men being in tech. So when you started working, did you feel like there was a lack of representation in leadership at that point?
It was.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, for me, it was even more different. So, I was in a steel marketing firm,
Mm-hmm.
and we were maybe 10 or 12 executives at that branch. And not just that branch, I'm talking the whole state. There were five or six branches, and
Okay.
I was the only female
Mm-hmm.
at the time. And this was back in India. I think I was just feeling proud that I was a woman that reached there versus actually thinking about the fact that that there needs to be better representation. But if you think about it, when we were growing up back in India, right? There is, and even now, there is so much reservation that is
Mm-hmm.
there in all the colleges, engineering college,
Yep.
medical college, right? In some ways, it's I think it started as a way of giving representation and the opportunity to the underprivileged. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not really just a thing in um, the workplace. It's
Right.
actually there in society, right? Especially when you have different layers and you say, hey, these people who are underprivileged, we're going to reserve so many seats. you know there's pros and cons, but we've seen that beyond just the workplace.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think there I do still believe that that particular aspect needs some tweaks to be better. I know it came from a good place, but I still feel like probably the underprivileged or underrepresented groups are not being able to use it to their full capacity. However, I still feel like that's a good start because we are trying to give them resources at a very early stage. Because, for example, when I got into my first company, we were a group of people who got recruited into that company, and we were recruited from various branches. So, what our company did was provide a one semester worth of training to all of us, irrespective of whether we come from computer science background or civil engineering background. So I felt like that was helping the entire group prepare in the right way and then lead a project or even work on it. So I felt like that was a very good start in terms of us getting into the tech industry.
That's very nice. When you said tech industry, I've realized over the years is I've seen less of it in engineering, for
Mm-hmm.
example. I've seen more in sales and marketing,
Mm-hmm.
where there's less representation of the diverse groups compared to the traditional executives that you see.
Mm-hmm. Right. Another instance that I faced was in my previous company. My manager would always reach out to me for arranging any outings or any event planning, right? And I always, in the back of my head, I was like, why me? There's this whole team. Why is that my responsibility? And I mean, after a point, it took me a lot of time to realize that. And then I was like, you know what?
That is such a common thing
Right?
here in the corporate. Yes. So I remember we had a celebration for one of the projects that was getting over. So we were doing cake and drinks and stuff like that. And we had these executives who were traveling to every site. So when they were supposed to come to our location, the admin for this particular executive, like she called me, she was remote. Normally she would plan everything, but she called me and she said, hey, can you do this, and this kind of thing? And I was like, and there were so many of us, like six, seven of us at work, right? So she asked me, and I was like, I can. Except I don't do those things. I actually, honestly, for my kids' birthdays, since their childhood, I would outsource all the planning and all the work, even for baby birthdays. So I'm like, that's not me. I can't do it. But then that I'm just like, this is a joke example, but actually, I've seen that we were at another office, and there it was a room of, I would say, approximately 20 men and one
Mhm.
woman in that table in that room, and I just went there. She was the one who would in the end clean up and remove, put everything in its place.
Mm.
When lunches have to be ordered, she's the one doing it, and I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I had to tell her, I'm like, wow.
Why, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's we need to make sure that we first realize it and then stand up that, I can't be doing this all the time. As long as
If you
everybody's
enjoy it, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's, are you that person? That's the other aspect of it. Yeah. Interesting.
when we talk about diversity, one of the things that also jumps out is the pay parity, right? It could be between genders, race, or whatever. I remember reading some statistics that said in tech industry itself, as of 2024, for every dollar a man earns, it's 84 to 85 cents that the woman gets. So,
Guess what
all.
I'm doing tomorrow? I'm gonna go ask for a raise now.
Yeah, I mean, although I feel like we've done a good job progressing the right way, but I still feel like, there is still that gap. There's still work that needs to be done.
You know, there was a very good interview I had seen. This was many years ago. This was Priyanka Chopra. She's one of those famous actors in India, global now, even in the US. But there was an interview on pay parity. It wasn't as much on diversity, but on pay parity and why are women paid less in the movies versus men. And she had a very different perspective. She said, the day I can bring 100 crores to the movie as the leading woman, I think I deserve that same pay. Can't, then then there is, I get it. I may not agree with it, but I get why it is happening. Now, that's not true for every industry, but I thought that perspective was also a good perspective.
I agree. That's something that makes sense, right? It has some logic to it. And I think another reason, especially between women and men, there was this pay parity in industries such as tech industry is because um, women tend to take maternity leave, and they might get married and discontinue and not work, which I know was true in the past, but I think we're getting better. And I remember, again, there was another podcast that I was listening to, and they were talking about how other countries were dealing with issues like this. What they did was they introduced equal paternity and maternity leave, where both fathers and mothers are allowed to take 6 weeks off. So that is, that particular argument is taken off the table, and then they don't have a reason for them to have a bias between women and men.
What do you think some are some of the potential negative aspects of we got to get diversity? What have you seen in your experience?
I have seen this. I think, like all the other laws that there is that group of people who abuse the law, or take advantage. I like the reservations that we are talking about. I've seen so many times where a very well-off family or a financially stable individual gets that seat, whereas somebody else who was really in need of it. Exactly.
I think I have seen in the past 5 years tokenism, just going for diversity for the sake of diversity because it is the in thing. And we've seen where people have hired, promoted, and then suddenly they're having a merit issue and then they're scaling back. So there's always a balance. when we talk about diversity, we need to mean it.
Yeah.
We need to go about it intentionally, with purpose, with logic, as you said, training, mentorship, and then bring people in appropriately. Otherwise, we're just talking about surface level
Yes.
inclusion. We're talking about tokenism. We're talking about too much too soon,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
then having to bear the negative aspects of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think while diversity is very important, we cannot compromise on quality. So, and that's also important in empowering that group of people, because when you make sure that that individual is qualified, they're going to make sure that they mentor the rest of the group, and that there's somebody that that particular group can look up to, right? So it is very important.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Have you ever felt like somebody treated you like a diversity candidate? Or
I wouldn't say, I was treated a certain way, but I would say that growing up, I did feel lack of representation, because my parents always gave a lot of importance to education, and I was like, yes, I want to be someone when I grow up, but I did not have somebody that I can look up to. Now, when I am an engineer, I'm sure my nieces have somebody that they can look at and be like, okay, that is one option, one of them has done this, that's a way that I can take. But yeah, that's one thing that I really struggled with, where I had to figure out things by myself, uh, versus it would have been a little bit easier if there was somebody who was already accomplished.
wow. I've always been this person who would fight for what I need and, where I want to go, and I would put in all the effort. We had traveled to one of our other offices, and there were a few more senior leaders there, and we were doing interview for the organization. So from one of those famous tech papers, there was this reporter who was coming to interview this particular executive. And while we were prepping for it, I was the only woman who had traveled, and I was in the room, and I wasn't supposed to speak or be there. And then he said, let's have her here. It'll be good for the photos. And I was like, I'm a diversity candidate, or I'm like there for the photo op. And I didn't say anything because, you have to process it. It was much later, I think at least a year later, when I play that scene back in my head, is when I feel like I should have said something. At the end of the day, I don't even think it was a bias from his side. I think it was just the conditioning. So if you think about it, it's how we're wired, or what we've heard since the beginning.
Yeah, that sometimes it's very subconscious, right? It just happens, and sometimes that person itself can't wouldn't have realized that.
Exactly, exactly. So what do you think? Where do you think this is going? Where do you see this in the next 5 years, for example?
Well, I would say that we still have a lot of way to go. Like you said, it has to mean something. It's not for the sake of it. Diversity can look good on paper, but how committed are you actually into doing something for that community to make sure?
I think the next generation, they are a lot less judgmental, more accepting. And I believe that the next generation will bring more change over the years.
They're very vocal, they know what they want, they know what is right, and I'm very happy that they're so confident in vocalizing. Like you said, there have been so many instances where even I wasn't able to uh, even realize at that moment, and then the
Exactly.
moment passes, and then I'm like, okay, I should have said something. But I don't think this generation.
Excited for them.
Yep.
It is so nice talking to you, Shrestha. I always learn something when I talk to you. Thank you for the conversation again. And to our listeners, if you like what you hear, please do like, subscribe to our channel so you can keep listening to the upcoming podcasts.